What would you do if a single sentence over the phone shattered all the trust you spent years building in your marriage? What would you do if, right after reading, "I'm stuck at work, babe," on your phone screen, a waiter on the other end told you your husband wasn't in the office at all, but sitting at table 5, celebrating his engagement with another woman? This isn't just a story about cheating. It's a story about waking up from a broken dream, about learning to love yourself when everything around you whispers that you're not enough. And if you stay with me until the end, maybe you'll recognize parts of your own story in these scars. My name is Elena, and for a very long time I was the perfect wife. At least that's how my husband, Daniel, introduced me at every gathering, every work dinner, every party. This is my wife. The one who understands my job, who puts up with my long hours, who never complains. I would smile, shake hands, laugh at jokes that didn't really amuse me, and nod politely while, deep inside, a small voice wanted to ask, "And who understands me?" But I never asked. I was too afraid of ruining that perfect image he showed the world, and that I, without noticing, had learned to carry on my shoulders. When I met Daniel, I didn't have much. Just a rented room, a tiring job at a small bookstore, and a heart full of clumsy stitches. I grew up in a home where love was conditional: good grades, good behavior, good results. If I failed, the punishment was silence. I learned very early that making mistakes meant becoming invisible. So when Daniel appeared with his confident smile, his talk of projects and future plans, his way of looking at me like I was the only person in the room, I felt like, finally, someone was choosing me without asking for anything in return. Or at least, that's what I thought. We got married after 2 years of dating. It wasn't a fancy wedding, but for me it felt like a miracle. I still remember the warm lights in that simple hall, the tables decorated with cheap flowers, the sound of laughter and my mother's tearful eyes. She squeezed my hand as if, without words, she were begging, "Please, let it be different for you. Don't go through what I did." And for a while, it looked like it would be different. Daniel worked at a tech company, and I gave tutoring lessons at night to help with the bills. We had plans: save for an apartment, travel someday, maybe start a family when things were more stable. But little by little, his job stopped being just a part of his life and turned into the center of everything. First there were a few extra hours, then weekends, stuck in the office, then quick business trips to other cities. Every time I asked about it, the answer was always the same, almost like a script: "I'm stuck at work, babe." I would read that sentence on my phone while the dinner on the table grew cold, and I tried to convince myself this was normal, that this was what responsible men did, that complaining would make me selfish or immature. My pain wasn't just the empty side of the bed. It was the silent loneliness of someone who is afraid to ask questions. I'd see other couples going out to dinner, traveling, posting happy photos together, and without meaning to, I started comparing my life to theirs. Maybe I'm too sensitive, I thought. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe I don't understand how hard his job really is. So I deleted the message I wanted to send, the one that said, "Do you still love me?" and replaced it with, "It's okay, love. I'll wait. Take care." And that's how I slowly turned down the volume of my own voice, one day at a time. Betrayal rarely begins with a hidden kiss. Most of the time, it starts with silence and small things out of place. The first sign was a crumpled receipt I found in Daniel's jacket pocket while sorting out the laundry. It fell onto the floor, and out of simple curiosity I opened it. The restaurant name jumped out at me: Casa del Mar. One of those fancy places with ocean views and prices way above what we could afford. The date on the receipt was a Saturday. He was supposedly away on a business trip. That night, when he walked through the door, he still smelled faintly of restaurant perfume. I could have pulled out the receipt, laid it on the table, and asked him about it. Instead, I folded the paper and pushed it into the pocket of my own jacket, as if hiding it would hide reality along with it. "Rough day?" I asked. He gave me a quick kiss on the forehead, turned on the TV, and sighed. You have no idea, love. Complicated clients, delayed projects. I'm stuck at work, babe. But it's all for us, you know that. I nodded, with a smile that I now recognize as the smile of someone who's more afraid of losing the lie than facing the truth. Then came the changed passwords on social media, the phone always placed face down, the bathroom trips with the phone in his hand, the quiet laughter at messages I never saw. When I asked anything, Daniel would frown and let out a tired sigh. Elena, please, trust me. I work with sensitive information. Don't start acting paranoid. That word, paranoid, started sticking to my skin like a label. Every time I felt a knot in my stomach, instead of listening to it, I told myself, I'm exaggerating. I'm overreacting. This is just me being dramatic. Until one day, while having coffee with my friend Camila, something pierced right through me. She said it casually, almost in passing. I think I saw Daniel the other day at that fancy place, Casa del March. I thought he was out of town. The world shrunk a little. Before my face could betray me, I answered quickly, yes, he had a business dinner with a foreign client. That must have been it. Camila nodded, changed the subject, and the conversation carried on. But inside me, the word client started echoing with something else attached to it. Or was it fiancé? The night that changed everything started like so many others. I prepared something simple for dinner, pasta with tomato and basil, because that smell always brought Daniel straight into the kitchen. I set the table, lit a cheap candle I'd found in a drawer, and put on a soft playlist on my phone. When the clock showed 9:30 and the food was already cold, my phone vibrated. The message was short, almost automatic. I'm stuck at work, babe. Don't wait up. I love you. I stared at the screen, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something else, something less painful. The I love you tagged on at the end was the anesthetic I'd learned to accept. I replied with a simple, okay. Take care. Then I placed my phone face down on the table, copying his habit. But that night, something in me refused to fall asleep. A new restlessness traveled through my body, like a part of me had finally grown tired of being the woman who always understands everything. I can't say exactly what it was. Maybe the sum of all my doubts, maybe the memory of that restaurant receipt, maybe just the crushing silence of the empty apartment. I felt a pressure on my chest and a tiny voice, one I had silenced for years, whispered inside me, what if this isn't paranoia? What if you're right? I picked up my phone again and, almost without thinking, typed the restaurant's name into the search bar, Casa del March. The phone number popped up. My hands were shaking. I could have deleted the number and gone on pretending nothing was wrong. I could have told myself it was crazy to call. But for the first time in a very long time, my need to know was stronger than my fear of losing. I took a deep breath and hit call. The ringing echoed through the empty apartment. On the third ring, a polite male voice answered, Casa del Mar, good evening. How can I help you? I swallowed hard. Hi. I'm sorry to bother you, I said, my voice trembling. Could you tell me if there's a reservation under the name Daniel Herrera? I heard plates clinking, people talking, glasses touching. The waiter asked me to hold for a moment, moved the phone away, and I could hear my own heartbeat louder than anything else. After a few seconds that felt endless, he came back on the line. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Daniel Herrera is here. Table 5. The air turned heavy. Is he alone? I managed to ask. There was a brief silence, far too long to be nothing. When the waiter spoke again, his tone had changed. It wasn't just professional anymore, it was the voice of someone who knows he's about to say something that will break another person's life in two. No, ma'am, he's not alone. He's here with his fiancée. They're celebrating. I don't clearly remember what I did next. I just know that a few minutes later, I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, my hands gripping the sink, trying not to fall apart. I splashed water on my face, pulled my hair back into a messy bun, threw a coat over my pajamas, and slipped on some old sneakers. I grabbed my bag, my keys, my phone, and walked out of the apartment like someone running from a fire. The taxi ride to the restaurant is a blur in my memory, the city lights were just streaks sliding by the window. When the taxi pulled up in front of Casa del Mar, the smell of the ocean mixed with expensive perfume drifting from the open door. Warm lights lit up well-dressed couples, soft laughter, glasses raised in toasts. It looked like a scene from a romantic film, except for the enormous knot in my throat. I walked in, feeling the cold marble floor beneath my feet. A waiter approached me with the usual courteous smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" I took a deep breath and asked quietly, "Were you the one who answered my call a few minutes ago?" The man looked at me closely, as if he were putting puzzle pieces together. He was young, maybe around 30, with dark circles under his eyes from long shifts, but with surprisingly kind eyes. "Are you Elena?" he asked. Hearing my name on his lips startled me, but I nodded. He lowered his voice. "Please, follow me. I'm not going to take you straight to the table. Not yet. But I think you deserve to see the truth." His words frightened me and gave me strength at the same time. We walked down a side corridor, past quieter tables, until we reached a wooden screen separating the main dining room from a semi-private area. The waiter, who I would later learn was named Thomas, pointed discreetly toward a narrow gap. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, and looked through the opening. There it was, table 5. And there he was. Daniel, seated across from a young woman in a light-colored dress, with a nervous smile. On the table, 2 glasses of sparkling wine, elegant plates, candles burning softly. In his hands, a small red box open, with a ring shining under the light. P20. The scene was so perfectly romantic that for a second my mind refused to accept it. I knew that gesture. I knew that smile, that way he leaned forward when he spoke. I had seen him do all of this with me, years before. My legs weakened. Thomas seemed to notice and whispered beside me, "She doesn't know, ma'am." They came together, but he was the one who asked us to list her as his fiancée for the reservation. I swear. I looked at the woman, at the emotion in her face, at the way her fingers nervously twisted the napkin. She wasn't my enemy. She was another link in Daniel's chain of lies. I don't know how long I stood there, hidden behind that screen, watching Daniel talk, laugh, slide the ring onto her finger as she covered her mouth in shock. At some point, Thomas gently rested a hand on my shoulder. "Do you want me to call someone? Do you want to leave?" he asked cautiously. I could have walked away, disappeared, pretended I hadn't seen anything. But something inside me, anger, dignity, exhaustion, maybe all 3, refused to keep running. "I want to talk to her," I said, my voice raw but steady. P22. Thomas nodded, surprised, and asked me to wait in a small private room at the back, a quiet salon that happened to be empty that night. A few minutes later, I saw him approach table 5. He leaned toward Daniel and whispered something in his ear. My husband's face changed instantly, the color drained away. He subtly turned his head, trying to see beyond the screen, but Thomas gestured for him to stay put. Then he leaned toward the woman and spoke softly to her as well. The brightness in her eyes vanished in an instant. Her hand started to tremble. P23. Thomas came back to me. "I told her someone needs to talk to her in private," he explained. "If you still want to, I'll bring her here." I nodded. Moments later, the woman walked into the room. Up close, she looked even younger than I'd thought. Her eyes were red from the tears she was trying to hold back. She stopped a few steps away from me, not sure what to say. "I'm Valeria," she murmured at last. Thomas said that you. Her voice broke before she could finish the sentence. P24. I'm Daniel's wife, I said, cutting straight through the fog. The word wife fell between us like a heavy stone. Valeria's eyes flew wide open as she clapped a hand over her mouth. He told me he was divorced, she whispered. He said he'd had a very hard relationship with a woman who didn't support him, who only criticized his work, that he was alone, that he worked so much because he had no one waiting at home. Every sentence was a blow. They were the same excuses he had used with me, only now I was the villain in his story. P25. I told her, my voice shaking but clear, that we were still married, that very night he had texted me, I'm stuck at work, babe. Don't wait up. I told her about the receipt, about the lonely nights, the changed passwords. I watched Valeria's eyes fill with tears, not just because of what he had done to me, but because of what he had done to her. In that moment, I understood something important. I wasn't facing the other woman. I was face to face with another victim of the same lie. P26. When Daniel finally walked into the room, with Thomas beside him, the air became heavy. He tried to put on his usual smile, but it wouldn't come. Elena, love, I can explain, he started, mixing words, reaching for that soft tone that had calmed me so many times before. For the first time in years, I cut him off, not by shouting, but with a quiet firmness that surprised even me. Don't say you can explain, Daniel. Tonight I don't want a story. I want you to look at what you've done. He stood there, between Valeria and me, glancing from one to the other like an actor who suddenly realizes he has no lines left. There were no plates thrown, no screaming meltdown. What there was much harder, the decision to let go. Valeria was the first to leave. She placed the small red box back in Daniel's hand and said, her voice cracking, I don't want a future that starts with a lie. Then she turned to me and whispered, I'm so sorry. I really didn't know. I hugged her. And in that embrace between two strangers wounded by the same man, I understood that the guilt didn't belong to us. It never had. In the days that followed, Daniel tried to get to me any way he could. Long texts, missed calls, emails, flowers left at my door. He wrote about existential crises, fear of getting older, feeling empty, not knowing who he really was. He claimed he'd gotten confused, that I was too good for him and that scared him. He used every cliché in the book to try to win forgiveness without fully owning what he'd done. For a while, I reread his messages over and over, searching for some spark of truth that might justify my pain. But in the end, I found only one clear truth: someone who loves you doesn't push you into the background while building a secret life with someone else. I started therapy. It was painful. I had to face not only Daniel's betrayal, but my own old wounds. I discovered that the little girl I once was, the one who believed she had to be perfect to avoid being abandoned, was still alive inside me, terrified. I realized that, without knowing it, I'd chosen a man who fed that fear, who kept me permanently in debt. You're strong, you can handle this, you understand my work. I learned that being strong isn't about enduring everything in silence. Sometimes, real strength is saying, enough. This ends here. Thomas, the waiter, didn't disappear from my life after that night. At first it was just short messages, almost formal, checking in to see if I was okay, sending me the contact of a good divorce lawyer, asking if I needed anything. Over time, our conversations grew longer and lighter. We talked about books, music, about how he'd learned, from years of watching people at tables, to tell who was truly in love and who was just putting on a show for the photos. He said restaurants were full of secrets, that you could see the end of some relationships written right there on the plates. It wasn't a quick replacement, or a one nail drives out another story. First came a reunion with myself. I started reading for pleasure again, walking by the sea alone, cooking meals I liked, for me, not for some us that no longer existed. I laughed louder. I cried when I needed to, without apologizing for it. I spent time looking in the mirror, trying to find the woman underneath the role of understanding wife. Little by little, I stopped checking my phone for a miraculous apology from Daniel. One night, I realized that entire days had gone by without me thinking about him. I took a deep breath. It felt like I was finally breathing my own air. A year after the night of Table 5, I went back to Casa del March. Not as a betrayed wife, not as a woman hiding behind a screen, but as a guest at a literary event organized by the bookstore where I worked. The place looked the same warm lights, the same sound of the sea drifting in, the same smell of fresh bread and wine. But one thing was completely different, me. Thomas was waiting for me at the entrance, with a smile that felt safe and familiar now. "Table 7 for you tonight, okay?" he joked. "Table 5 doesn't define you anymore." I laughed, and in my own laughter I recognized a new lightness. During the event, I spoke about books that heal, about stories that help us put names to what we feel. As I talked, my eyes wandered across the restaurant and stopped for a second on a man sitting alone, scrolling distractedly through his phone. It took me a few moments to recognize him. It was Daniel. He looked different. Thinner, more tired, the shine of confidence dimmed in his eyes. There was no one sitting in front of him. No fiancé, no glass raised in celebration. Just a half-eaten meal and a glass of water. Our eyes met for a moment. I felt a short shiver, not of love, not of longing, but of memory. Memory of who I used to be when I was sitting at his table. He lifted his hand slightly, as if considering coming over. I simply nodded a distant hello and turned my attention back to my audience. For the first time, I didn't need him to see me. I wanted to keep seeing myself. When the event finished, I stepped out onto the terrace to get some fresh air. The sky was full of stars, and the sound of the waves rolled in softly from the distance. Thomas walked out with 2 coffees in his hands. "From what I can see, you're no longer the woman of, 'I'm stuck at work, babe,'" he said with a gentle smile. "You're the woman who found herself after Table 5. I smiled back. "I guess sometimes you have to have your heart broken to finally hear your own voice," I answered. We stood there in silence for a while, listening to the sea. Then Thomas spoke again, a little nervous. "Elena, if you ever want to come here and have dinner without painful memories, without lies, just to celebrate how far you've come, I'd love to sit with you. Not as your waiter, not as a witness of your worst night. Just as Thomas." I looked at him. I didn't feel fireworks or violins. What I felt was something much more real, peace. "Maybe it's time to start writing a new story," I said. "Not a perfect fairy tale, not a guaranteed happily ever after, but a story where lies don't get a reserved table. Maybe you, the one who made it this far, are going through something similar. Maybe you're reading the same kinds of messages over and over. 'I'm stuck at work, don't worry, she's just a friend, trust me.' Maybe you found a receipt, a strange chat, a look that doesn't make sense, and you're calling all of it paranoia, so you don't have to face it. I'm not here to tell you what to do. Every heart has its own timing. But I do want to remind you of something. You were not born to be anybody's backup plan. You're not too dramatic for wanting respect, presence, and honesty. That's not a luxury. That's the minimum. Sometimes, the cruelest part of betrayal isn't the act itself, but the way it makes us doubt our own worth. I spent sleepless nights asking myself what I was missing, where I'd gone wrong, what I could have done differently. Today I know that, yes, we all make mistakes, but the choice to lie, cheat, and build a secret life behind someone's back was never mine. And if you're watching this with your heart in a knot, I want to tell you something from the deepest part of me. You're not foolish for having trusted. You're not weak for having loved. But from this moment on, you get to choose who you keep giving that love to. So let me ask you, do you believe in destiny, Or do you think there are falls that are really just the universe pushing us out of places we no longer fit? Have you ever lived something like this, felt like a broken heart forced you to finally find yourself? If this story touched a wound in you, I invite you to share in the comments. Sometimes, telling what hurts is the first step to making it hurt less. And if you know someone who is doubting their own value because of betrayal, send this video to them. Maybe they need to hear that they're not alone. If this story spoke to your heart, if at any moment you saw yourself in Elena, I'd like to invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and keep following these stories that, in the end, are just mirrors of real life. Because every story you hear can be the hug you didn't get on your hardest day. And who knows, maybe the next story we tell here will be about someone who, like you, decided to stand up from the table of lies and finally sit down at the table of their own dignity.